February 8, 1943. 4:12 a.m. Detroit Tank, Arsenal, River Rouge, Plant, Michigan. The design hall was a cathedral of steel and desperation. 40-foot ceilings lost in shadow. Windows frosted thick enough to block the street lamps outside. The kind of cold that made your joints ache and your breath hang in the air like accusations. Thaddeus Crane stood alone at the drafting table under the single light that still worked at this hour. 38 years old, lean in the way men get when they forget to eat, dark circles under his eyes that had been there so long they looked permanent. His hands stained with nicotine and blueprint ink rested flat on photographs that told a story no engineer wanted to see. Sherman tanks, his Sherman tanks, the ones he'd designed 3 years ago when the world still made sense. When American steel and American ingenuity seemed like enough to win any war. The photographs showed a different truth. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. February 14th through 22nd, just 2 weeks ago. Shermans burning in the North African sun, turrets blown 20 feet from their hulls, hatches jammed shut with boys still inside. In one photograph, you could see crew members trying to escape. Trying. The camera had caught them mid-motion, turned to silhouettes by the flames consuming the tank around them. Crane had designed those death traps, signed his name to the blueprints, shook hands with generals who told him his work would save American lives. He'd believed them. He'd believed himself. The red telephone rang. Not the regular phone. The red one. The line that went straight to Washington. The line that only rang when someone important wanted something impossible. Crane stared at it for 3 rings. 4. On the 5th, he picked it up. No greeting. Just a voice he recognized from newsreels. Flat, Midwestern. The kind of voice that didn't waste words because it didn't have time. "This is General Dwight Eisenhower. Am I speaking with Thaddeus Crane?" Crane's throat went dry. "Yes, sir." "Good, I'm going to tell you something and you're going to listen without interrupting. We have a problem. German Tiger tanks. You've seen the intelligence reports." It wasn't a question, but Crane answered anyway. "Yes, sir." "Then you know what they're doing to our armor." Kasserine was a massacre. 183 Shermans destroyed, 4 Tigers lost, 4. Do you understand what that ratio means, Mr. Crane? It means the Germans have better tanks. It means American boys are dying in vehicles you designed because we don't have a weapon that can kill Tigers. Sicily invasion launches in 5 months. We're sending 80,000 men onto that island. Current projections say 8,000 casualties if we can't counter German heavy armor. 8,000 dead Americans, Mr. Crane. Most of them tank crews climbing into Shermans that can't protect them. Crane closed his eyes, saw the photograph, the crew members, the flames. "I need a Tiger killer," Eisenhower said. "Not next year, not in 6 months, now." "Sir, normal weapon development takes—" "I don't care about normal. 25 days, Mr. Crane. You have 25 days to design, prototype, and test a tank destroyer capable of killing Tigers at combat range. Can you do it?" The question hung in the frozen air of the design hall. Thaddeus Crane looked at the photographs on his table, looked at the empty drafting boards around him, looked at his hands and wondered if they could build redemption in 600 hours. "I don't know," he said. "Wrong answer, yes or no." "With respect, General, you're asking for something that's never been done. Designed to combat-ready deployment in 25 days. Violates every principle of—" "Mr. Crane, listen to me very carefully. Every day you spend telling me why it can't be done, 200 American boys die. Yes or no?" Thaddeus Crane looked at the burning Shermans one more time. "Yes." The line went dead. Crane stood there holding the silent receiver. Outside, the first shift workers were arriving. Car doors slamming in the pre-dawn dark, voices muffled by the cold, men and women coming to build the weapons that would win the war. Or lose it. He hung up the phone and walked to the window. pressed his forehead against the frozen glass and felt the cold seep into his skull. 25 days, 600 hours, 36,000 minutes to build something that had never existed, to fix his mistake, to stop boys from burning. The numbers were impossible, but then so was losing the war. Crane turned back to the empty drafting hall and began turning on lights. One by one. 40 feet up to the ceiling, fluorescent tubes flickering to life in the darkness. He had calls to make, engineers to wake up, coffee to brew, a miracle to build, and 24 days, 19 hours, and 43 minutes to do it. 6:00 a.m., 2 hours later. The design hall no longer looked empty. 37 men filled the space, some at drafting tables, others standing because there weren't enough chairs, all of them looking at Crane like he'd lost his mind, which, to be fair, he might have. The oldest man in the room, Cornelius Vandermeer, everyone called him Dutch, stood with his arms crossed over his chest, 62 years old, white hair cut military short, left eye socket empty, covered by a leather patch he'd worn since 1918. 25 years building tanks, 25 years knowing exactly how long things took to do properly. "Run that by me again," Dutch said. "Slowly this time." Crane pointed at the intelligence photographs pinned to a corkboard behind him. German Tiger tanks, massive, angular, terrifying in their geometric simplicity. Tiger Y, Panzerkampfwagen 6, 54 metric tons, frontal armor 100 millimeters thick, 88 millimeter main gun, effective range exceeds 1 kilometer. It can kill any tank we have from distances where our guns can't even scratch it. "We know what Tigers are," Dutch said. "What we don't know is what fairy tale you're about to sell us." "Not a fairy tale. An order. From Eisenhower. We have 25 days to design and build a weapon that can destroy Tigers." Silence. The kind that fills a room when everyone's thinking the same thing, but nobody wants to say it first. A younger engineer, Wendell Finch, 28, MIT graduate, thick glasses that made his eyes look too large, raised his hand, like he was still in a classroom. "Yes, Wendell. 25 days. Design, prototype, and test. That's what the general said. Sir, with respect, that's not possible. Normal tank development requires 18 months minimum. Metallurgy testing alone takes 6 weeks. Suspension, geometry, power, train, integration, fire control systems, we're talking about hundreds of sequential steps that can't be accelerated without compromising." "Then we'll compromise," Crane said. Dutch uncrossed his arms. "Excuse me. We'll compromise, we'll cut corners, we'll violate regulations, we'll do whatever it takes to meet the deadline because the alternative is 8,000 American casualties at Sicily." "Thaddeus." Dutch walked to the front of the room, stood close enough that Crane could smell the cigarette smoke on his clothes. "I've built tanks for 25 years. I built Saint-Chamons at Belleau Wood. I've seen what happens when you rush engineering. You know what you get. What but dead crews? Not from German guns, from their own equipment failing at the worst possible moment. You're talking about skipping fundamental safety testing. You're talking about fielding experimental weapons without knowing if they'll kill Americans before they kill Germans." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." "Then you're talking about murder." The word echoed in the high ceiling of the design hall. Murder. Not a mistake. Not an accident. Murder. Crane didn't blink. "If we do nothing, 8,000 men die. If we try and fail, maybe 5 men die from equipment failure. I can live with those odds. Can you?" Dutch's good eye bored into him. "Can you really live with sending boys into tanks you know might kill them?" Crane thought about the photographs. The burning Shermans, the silhouettes in the flames. "I'm already living with it," he said quietly. "Every day. Every Sherman that burns, every crew that doesn't make it out. I designed those tanks, Dutch. I put my name on them. And now they're coffins. So yeah, I can live with risking 5 to save 8,000. The question is, can you? Dutch stood there for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Crane watched him go. Felt something essential breaking apart inside his chest. Dutch had been with him since the beginning, since the first Sherman rolled off the line in 1941. Losing him meant losing institutional knowledge, losing expertise. Losing Dutch stopped at the door, didn't turn around. Belleau Wood taught me 2 things, he said. Perfect is the enemy of done, and men die when you rush. He turned his head, showing his profile, the empty eye socket. But they also die when you're slow. I'll stay. But if we kill Americans with bad engineering, that blood's on both our hands, not just yours. He didn't wait for an answer, just walked back to a drafting table and sat down. 36 engineers remained. 36 men too old for combat, too experienced to waste on infantry, too stubborn to quit when someone told them something was impossible. Crane looked at them, really looked, saw the gray in their hair, the stoop in their shoulders from decades bent over drafting tables, the hands marked with scars from factory work. These men had built America's industrial might, had turned drawings into steel, had made the impossible routine. If anyone could do this, it was them. All right, Crane said. Here's what we're going to do. He walked to a large chalkboard and began drawing. Not a detailed blueprint, just shapes, basic forms, the essence of an idea. Tigers have one weakness, the same weakness all German armor has. Their guns are better than ours. Their armor is thicker than ours, but they move like they're stuck in mud because they're so damn heavy. 54 tons means slow, means predictable, means if we can hit them from a prepared position, they're vulnerable. Hit them with what? Someone called from the back. Our 76mm guns can't penetrate a Tiger's front armor. You're right, they can't. So we don't use a 76mm. Crane drew a larger shape. We use a 90mm. Wendell Finch stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. The M1 anti-aircraft gun. Exactly. Sir, that gun was designed to shoot airplanes. It's never been tank-mounted. The recoil forces would be massive. I know. We'll figure it out. Dutch spoke without looking up from his table. What chassis? M10 tank destroyer, already in production, proven suspension, open-top turret we can modify. Modify how? This was the part that would either convince them or make them walk out. Crane drew 2 more shapes on the chalkboard, one with a turret, one without. We get rid of the turret entirely, fixed casemate, gun mounts directly to the hull, no traverse mechanism, no complicated turret ring, no massive counterweights, just a gun, a shield, and a hull. The room erupted. You can't aim without traverse. How do you engage moving targets? That's not a tank destroyer, that's a pillbox on tracks. Crane let them argue, let them shout, let them convince themselves it wouldn't work. Then he picked up a piece of chalk and wrote 2 numbers on the board. 18 months, 25 days. The room went quiet. Conventional tank destroyer with a turret, Crane said, tapping the first number. 18 months from design to deployment. Maybe longer if we want to mount a 90mm gun. New turret ring, new traverse mechanism, new counterweight system, new everything. He tapped the second number. Fixed casemate. 25 days. We use existing M10 hulls. We use existing 90mm guns. We use existing armor plate. We don't invent anything new. We just combine things that already exist in a way nobody's tried before. Because it's suicide, someone muttered. No, Crane said. Because it's simple, and simple is fast, and fast is what we need. Wendell raised his hand again. Sir, I need to run calculations. Recoil forces on a fixed mount, crew survivability in a non-rotating casemate, structural integrity of... Then run them. Now, everyone listen up. Crane grabbed a roster sheet and started dividing names. Dutch, you're on the gun mount team. Figure out how to attach a 90mm to an M10 hull without the whole thing tearing itself apart. Wendell, you're on the mathematics, recoil calculations, armor geometry, fire rates, everything that needs numbers. The rest of you divide into 3 groups: chassis modification, ammunition storage, fire control systems, questions. An engineer in the back, older, heavyset, looked like he hadn't slept in a week, raised his hand. What if the calculations say it won't work? Then we make it work anyway. That's not how engineering... That's exactly how engineering works when you have 25 days, Crane said. We're not building a perfect tank destroyer. We're building one that's good enough to kill tigers before Sicily. Perfect comes later. Functional comes now. Everyone clear? No one answered, but no one left either. Crane looked at the clock on the wall. 6:47 a.m. 24 days and 17 hours remaining. Get to work. 8:00 a.m. The factory floor was organized chaos. Welders in leather aprons, machinists covered in cutting oil, women in coveralls with their hair wrapped in bandanas. The arsenal ran 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The war didn't sleep, so neither did Detroit. Thaddeus Crane walked the floor with Solomon Hirsch, the factory director, 55 years old, built like a barrel, thick hands scarred from decades of factory work. Immigrant, German-born, Jewish. He'd left Berlin in 1938 with 1 suitcase and $60. Watched from New York as his uncle's family disappeared into Treblinka. He took the war personally. Eisenhower called you directly? Solomon asked, voice raised over the hammering of sheet metal. 4 a.m. And he wants this in 25 days. 24 now. Solomon stopped walking, turned to face Crane. Thaddeus, I've run this arsenal for 7 years. I've seen production miracles, but this is insane. I know. Do you really? Because what you're proposing isn't just fast, it's reckless. We'd be fielding a weapon system with 0 testing, 0 metallurgical verification, 0 long-term reliability data. If that vehicle fails in combat, 5 men die instead of 8,000. Don't give me ratios, give me reality. You're talking about gambling with American lives. Crane stopped in front of a half-assembled Sherman, looked at the turret ring, the thin armor, the gun that couldn't punch through tiger steel. We're already gambling with American lives' soul. Every Sherman we build is a gamble that it'll be good enough, that the crew will be lucky enough, that they won't run into a tiger. But they are running into tigers, and they're dying. So yeah, I'm proposing we gamble, but at least this time we're betting on better odds. Solomon was quiet for a long moment. Around them the factory pounded and screeched and roared. The sound of American industry turning raw materials into weapons, into hope, into the difference between victory and defeat. What do you need? Solomon asked finally. Steel, 45 tons of armor grade, 3-inch plate minimum. Our monthly allocation is 8 tons. I know. So where am I supposed to get the other 37 tons? Magic. Scrap yards. Solomon stared at him. You want to build a tank destroyer out of scrap metal. I want to build a tank destroyer out of recycled armor plate. Sherman hulls from North Africa, damaged vehicles from training accidents, anything we can melt down and re-roll. That violates Army Ordnance Manual Section 4.7. Recycled armor is structurally compromised, forbidden for combat use. Then we'll break the rules. Thaddeus, Solomon, listen to me. We don't have virgin steel. We don't have time to smelt new plates. We have scrap in 24 days, so either we use what we have or we tell Eisenhower we can't do it. Your choice. Solomon looked at the Sherman, looked at the factory floor, looked at the workers building tanks as fast as human hands could move. Finally, he pulled a pen from his pocket and grabbed a requisition form from a nearby clipboard. How many scrap yards? He asked, already writing. 12. Detroit, Gary, Cleveland. Anything within a day's drive. Solomon signed the form. His hand shook slightly, but the signature was clear. If this fails, if we lose crews because of bad steel that's on both of us. I know. I mean it, Thaddeus. The families, the investigations, the courts-martial. We'll both hang for this. Then we better make sure it works. Solomon handed him the signed requisition. FDR's office calls me every morning, wants updates on production. What do I tell the president? Tell him we're building his Tiger Killer. And if he asks if it'll work, tell him we're betting American ingenuity against German steel. And we've never lost that bet before. Solomon laughed. It was a harsh sound, bitter. You know what makes this country great, Thaddeus, immigrants like me, who remember what we're fighting for, and madmen like you who forget it's supposed to be impossible. He walked away already barking orders at his assistant about steel procurement, about scrapyard contracts, about prioritizing everything for the vehicle that didn't even have a name yet. Crane stood alone on the factory floor and watched Shermans roll down the assembly line, one every 3 hours, round the clock, enough to supply the war effort, not enough to win it. He needed something better. He needed something impossible. He needed 24 days to turn desperation into deliverance. February 10th, 1943, 2 days later. Dutch Vandermeer stood in front of a 90mm anti-aircraft gun and tried to figure out how to keep it from killing anyone who fired it. The gun sat in the middle of the testing yard, a flat expanse of concrete surrounded by blast walls. Designed for testing weapons before they went into production. The 90mm M1 was meant to shoot down aircraft, pointing up. Recoil absorbed by the ground mount, by sandbags, by 4 tons of steel framework bolted into concrete. Now Crane wanted to mount it in a tank, pointing horizontal. All that recoil absorbed by what Hope Dutch walked around the gun slowly. His engineer's eye cataloging problems. The barrel was 8 feet long. The breech mechanism was massive. The recoil system hydraulic buffers designed for vertical fire would never handle the lateral stresses of tank combat. It won't work, he said to Wendell Finch, who was setting up measurement equipment nearby. Statistically, you're correct. Wendell adjusted a chronograph. Recoil force is approximately 14 metric tons over 0.08 seconds. M10 chassis is rated for maximum 6-ton lateral stress. We're exceeding design specifications by 133%. In English, kid, the gun will tear itself off the mount and probably kill everyone in the vehicle. That's what I thought. Dutch lit a cigarette, watched the smoke curl in the cold morning air. So why are we still doing this? Because Mr. Crane says we have to. And if Crane told you to jump off a bridge? Wendell looked at him with those 2 large eyes behind the thick glasses. Sir, if jumping off a bridge would save 8,000 American soldiers, I'd ask how high the bridge was. Dutch took a long drag on his cigarette, remembered being 28, remembered believing that engineering could solve anything if you just tried hard enough. Remembered Belleau Wood. Remembered what happened when belief ran into physics. You weren't at Belleau Wood, Dutch said quietly. No, sir, I was 7 years old. I watched a French tank, Saint-Chamond we called it, try to fire its gun on the move. Big 75mm naval cannon mounted on a tank chassis. Engineers said it would work, said they'd done the calculations, said the mount was strong enough. What happened? Gun tore free on the 3rd shot, crushed the commander, punctured the fuel tank, whole crew burned to death while I watched from a trench 50 yards away. You know what the worst part was? Wendell shook his head. The screaming stopped after about 30 seconds, but the smell lasted for hours. Dutch flicked ash onto the concrete. That's what happens when you let desperation override engineering. You get burning Frenchmen, or in our case, burning Americans. So what do? We make sure it doesn't happen again. Dutch ground out the cigarette under his boot. How much do you know about hydraulic recoil systems? Theoretically, everything, practically nothing. Good, Because theory's about to meet practice and it's gonna be ugly. We need buffers, big ones, multiple redundant systems. If one fails, the others take the load. Where can we get heavy-duty hydraulic cylinders on short notice? Wendell thought for a moment. Navy Yard, Philadelphia. They've got experimental 16-inch gun mounts. Hydraulics rated for 40-ton recoil forces. Perfect. Go get them. Sir, requisition protocols require 6 to 8 weeks for... I didn't say requisition, I said get them. You've got a car. Yes, but... Then drive to Philadelphia, find those buffers, bring them back. Don't ask permission. Don't fill out paperwork. Just get them here by tomorrow. Wendell stared at him. Sir, that's theft of military property. No, that's winning a war. Now get moving before I change my mind and go myself. Wendell grabbed his coat and ran. Dutch turned back to the 90mm gun, walked up to it, put his hand on the cold barrel. 25 years building tanks. 25 years making sure American boys had the best equipment human hands could create. Now Crane was asking him to field something that might kill the crew before it killed the enemy. He thought about those silhouettes in the burning Sherman photographs, thought about Kasserine Pass, thought about 8,000 projected casualties at Sicily. Sometimes you had to bet on desperate odds, because the alternative was certain death. Dutch pulled out a measuring tape and started taking dimensions. If they were going to do this, they were going to do it right, or as right as 22 days allowed. February 14th, 1943. 6 days into the deadline. The scrap steel arrived on flatbed trucks at 3 in the morning. 12 trucks, 48 tons of salvaged armor plate, Sherman hulls from North Africa, tank destroyers damaged in training accidents. Even some M3 Lee plates from early war vehicles that had been obsolete before they left the factory. Thaddeus Crane stood in the loading dock and watched workers unload the steel. Every piece was damaged, dented, burned, scarred from combat or accidents. This was the metal that had failed once. Now he was gambling it would hold a second time. Solomon appeared beside him, coffee cup steaming in his hand. Quality control looked at the first batch, found stress fractures in 40% of the plates. Weld integrity is questionable on another 30%. Metallurgy is all over the map. Some plates are high carbon, some low, some we can't even identify. Can we use it? According to regulations, no. According to Crane's School of Desperate Engineering, maybe. Maybe's better than nothing. Maybe gets people killed, Thaddeus. Crane watched a worker in a leather apron examine a Sherman glacis plate. The metal was scorched black. A hole the size of a dinner plate punched through the center. German 88mm. Clean penetration. The crew inside hadn't stood a chance. That steel failed at Kasserine, Crane said. But it didn't fail because the metal was bad. It failed because it was too thin, because we designed it wrong. If we melt it down, re-roll it thicker, angle it better, it'll hold. You're guessing. I'm engineering. Same thing, different confidence level. Solomon sipped his coffee. You know what my uncle told me before I left Berlin? He said, Seoul, America's different. In Germany, we ask permission. In America, you ask forgiveness. I didn't understand what he meant then. I do now. We're not asking either. No, we're just building and hoping and praying we don't kill the boys we're trying to save. Solomon finished his coffee and set the empty cup on a crate. River Rouge blast furnaces are ready. We can smelt the first batch by dawn. How thick do you want the new plates? 3 inches minimum. 4 if we can manage it. 4-inch armor plate on an M10 chassis. You'll overload the suspension. Then we'll reinforce the suspension. With what time, we've got 19 days left. So we work faster. Solomon laughed that bitter laugh again. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest. I haven't decided which. Can't it be both? In your case, probably. Solomon pulled out a pocket watch, checked the time. Smelting starts in 4 hours. I've got 200 workers on the furnace detail. They'll run continuous shifts until we've processed all 48 tons. 3 days, maybe 4. Then rolling, then cutting, then welding. If everything goes perfect, which it won't, we'll have armor plates ready by the 20th. That's 12 days from now. Math checks out. We'll have 7 days to assemble the vehicle and test it. Again, math checks out, though I'd like to point out that assemble and test in 7 days is still completely insane. Crane looked at the pile of scarred steel, the metal that had failed, the armor that hadn't been enough. Now he was asking it to be better, stronger, sufficient. He was asking American industry to perform alchemy, to turn failure into victory, to make 25 days feel like 18 months. Behind him, blast furnaces roared to life. The sound of steel melting, of impurities burning away, of second chances being forged in fire. 19 days, Crane said. We can do this. Solomon didn't answer, just walked away toward the furnaces, toward the work that would either save thousands or doom dozens, toward the impossible deadline that kept getting closer with every passing second, February 16, 1943. 8 days into the deadline. The blast furnaces at River Rouge ran so hot you could feel them from 50 yards away. Heat that warped the air, that made your eyes water, that turned February in Michigan into something closer to hell. Casimir Wojcik stood at the edge of the smelting floor and watched molten steel pour from the crucible into the rolling mill molds. Orange and white and so bright it hurt to look at directly. The metal that had failed at Kasserine Pass being reborn. Being given a second chance to protect American lives. Cash was 34 years old, short and broad across the shoulders. Hands like sledgehammers from 20 years of factory work. Polish immigrant. Came through Ellis Island in 1925 with his parents and his older brother Eddie. 2 boys who didn't speak English but understood that America meant opportunity, meant freedom, meant a future. Eddie had joined the Navy in 1940. Bosun's mate, 2nd class, USS Arizona, December 7, 1941. Cash had received the telegram on December 10th. Regret to inform you, killed in action, buried at sea. Except Eddie wasn't buried at sea. He was still in the Arizona, trapped in a steel tomb at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Would be there forever. The Navy couldn't recover the bodies, couldn't give the families anything except a flag and a letter from the president. Cash had folded that flag into a triangle, put it on his mantle, looked at it every morning before leaving for the arsenal. Reminded himself why he was welding 16 hours a day. Why his hands ached and his back screamed and his eyes saw welding arcs even when he closed them at night. Eddie had died because American armor was too thin. Cash would be damned if he let that happen to anyone else. First batch is ready. Solomon Hirsch appeared beside him, face streaked with soot. 3-inch plate, 4 tons. Quality control says the carbon content is inconsistent but within acceptable range. Acceptable for regulations or acceptable for Crane? Does it matter anymore? Cash watched the steel cool from white to orange to red. Eddie's ship had 3 inches of armor on the deck. The Japanese bomb went through it like it wasn't even there. 3 inches wasn't enough then. What makes us think it'll be enough now? Because we're angling it. Because we're using it against tanks, not bombs. Because it's all we have. That's not an answer. No, Solomon agreed. It's an excuse. But it's the best excuse we've got with 17 days left. Cash pulled his welding gloves from his belt. Thick leather. Burned and scarred from years of sparks and molten metal. When do we start cutting? Tomorrow morning. Crane wants the first casemate frame by the 18th. 2 days to cut and shape 4 tons of steel. Like I said, we're past regulations and into prayer. Cash walked towards the rolling mill, toward the steel that was cooling into plates, toward the metal that would either save lives or fail again. He thought about Eddie, about the Arizona, about how thin the line was between protection and death. "I'll get my crew," he said. "We'll work through the night." "Cash, you've been here for 20 hours already." "Eddie worked until he died. I can work until I'm tired." Solomon didn't argue, just nodded and walked away. On the arsenal floor, exhaustion wasn't weakness, it was patriotism. Everyone was tired, everyone hurt, everyone kept working anyway because the alternative was losing. And losing meant death, meant occupation, meant everything Eddie had died for would be meaningless. Cash looked at the cooling steel one more time. Then he turned and headed for the welding bay. He had 2 days to turn metal into salvation. 2 days to build something that would keep other families from getting telegrams, from folding flags, from staring at mantles and remembering brothers who would never come home. 2 days to make sure Eddie's death meant something. February 18th, 1943. 10 days into the deadline. Dutch Vandermeer hadn't slept in 36 hours. His good eye was bloodshot. His hands shook slightly from too much coffee and not enough food, but the hydraulic buffers were installed, and that was all that mattered. 4 cylinders, each one 2 feet long and 8 inches in diameter. Salvaged from the USS Pennsylvania by Wendell Finch, who'd driven to Philadelphia and back in 22 hours with a story about classified projects and Eisenhower's direct orders. The Navy lieutenant who'd signed them out probably thought he was helping the war effort. He was, just not the way he thought. The buffers were mounted on a test rig in the middle of the proving yard, a framework of steel beams that approximated the interior structure of an M10 hull. The 90mm M1 gun was bolted to the frame through a mounting bracket Dutch had designed in 4 hours and fabricated in 6. It looked crude, temporary, like something built in a garage by enthusiastic amateurs rather than professional engineers. Which Dutch reflected wasn't far from the truth. Thaddeus Crane stood 20 yards back with a notepad and a stopwatch. Wendell Finch was behind a concrete blast wall with a high-speed camera borrowed from the Army's ballistics laboratory. Cash Wojcik and 3 other welders stood at the edges of the yard ready to rush in if something catastrophic happened, which it probably would. "First test," Dutch called out. "Blank charge, no projectile, we're just testing the recoil system. Everyone clear?" Heads nodded. Crane gave a thumbs up. Dutch climbed into the test rig, sat in what would be the gunner's position. Looked through improvised sights at a target painted on the far blast wall. His hands found the firing mechanism, a simple lever that would trigger the firing pin. He thought about Belleau Wood, about the French Saint-Chamond, about the sound of metal tearing and men screaming. Then he pulled the lever. The world turned into noise and violence. The 90mm fired with a sound that was less a bang and more a physical blow to the chest. Dutch felt the concussion wave hit him even through the hearing protection. The test rig rocked backward on its frame. The hydraulic buffers screamed. High-pitched metal stress that set Dutch's teeth on edge. Then silence. Dutch opened his eyes. He was still alive. The test rig was still standing. The gun was still attached to the mount. He climbed out on shaking legs. Crane was already running forward with his notepad. "Recoil distance, maximum displacement. Time to return to battery. Give me numbers, Dutch. Give me a second to make sure I'm not dead first." But he was already walking around the test rig, already checking the mounting bolts, already running his hands over the hydraulic cylinders, looking for cracks or leaks or any sign that the system had failed. Nothing. The cylinders had compressed under load, the mounting bracket had flexed slightly, but everything had held. Wendell emerged from behind the blast wall with the high-speed camera. "Sir, the footage shows 0.87 seconds from firing to full battery return. Recoil distance was 18 inches. Hydraulic pressure peaked at 4,000 psi but stayed within system tolerances." "English kid," Dutch said. "It worked. The gun didn't tear free. The mount held. We can do this. Dutch looked at Crane, looked at the test rig, looked at the 90mm gun that had just fired without killing anyone. One shot, he said. We tested one shot. Combat firing means sustained fire. Multiple rounds. Heat buildup. Stress cycling. We haven't tested any of that. We will, Crane said. Next test in 4 hours, 5-round burst. Then we'll know if the system can handle sustained fire. And if it can't, then we redesign it overnight and test again tomorrow. Dutch wanted to argue, wanted to say they needed more time, more testing, more verification that they weren't building a death trap. But he looked at Crane's face and saw the same exhaustion he felt himself. Saw the same desperation, the same knowledge that 17 days wasn't enough time, but it was all the time they had. 4 hours, Dutch agreed. But Crane, if this thing fails during sustained fire, we're back to square one, and we don't have time for square one. Then it better not fail. Dutch walked away toward the workshop, toward the coffee that barely kept him conscious, toward the calculations that needed checking and rechecking because one mistake would kill people. Behind him, the test rig stood Slint in the proving yard, the gun that might save thousands or doom dozens. The engineering miracle or the engineering disaster. 4 hours would tell them which. February 20th, 1943, 12 days into the deadline. The sustained fire test began at 2 in the afternoon. Clear sky. Temperature 18 degrees, wind from the northwest at 12 miles per hour. Dutch insisted on recording every environmental condition. Said it mattered for the data analysis. Crane thought it was just Dutch's way of pretending they had time for proper methodology. The test rig had been reinforced, thicker mounting brackets, a 6th hydraulic buffer added for redundancy. Wendell had calculated stress loads for 5 rapid-fire rounds and declared it theoretically possible with a failure probability of 12%. 12% chance the gun would tear free and kill everyone nearby. Dutch took his position at the gunner's seat. Cash and his welding crew stood ready with fire extinguishers. Solomon had come out from his office to watch. Even workers from the main production floor had gathered at the edges of the proving yard. Word had spread through the arsenal. This was the moment. This was the test that would determine if Crane's impossible deadline was engineering genius or suicidal madness. 5 rounds, Dutch called out. Standard combat firing sequence, 10-second intervals on my mark. He loaded the first round, checked the sights, took a breath that didn't shake nearly as much as he expected. Firing! The first shot was the same violence as before, recoil, noise, the hydraulic buffers screaming. But the rig held. Dutch loaded the second round, his hands moved automatically, decades of training. Muscle memory that didn't care about fear or doubt or the 12% failure probability. Firing. Second shot. The recoil felt stronger this time, or maybe Dutch was just more aware of it. The mounting bracket was vibrating, a high-frequency oscillation that wasn't supposed to be there, but the rig held. Third round. Firing. The crack was audible even over the gun blast. A sharp metallic snap that made Dutch's blood go cold. Something had broken, something critical, but the gun was still attached. The buffers were still functioning. He loaded the fourth round because stopping now would invalidate the test and they didn't have time to run it again. Firing! Smoke was coming from somewhere. Dutch couldn't see the source, but he could smell it. Burning metal. Overheated hydraulic fluid. Something cooking under stress. 1 round left, 1 more shot, and they'd know if the system could survive combat firing rates. He loaded the 5th round, aimed, pulled the trigger. The explosion was different this time. Louder. Accompanied by a sound like tearing fabric. The test rig tilted, not much. Maybe 5 degrees, but 5 degrees meant structural failure. Meant something had given way under the accumulated stress. Dutch bailed out of the gunner's seat, hit the concrete and rolled. came up 20 feet away with his heart hammering and his hands shaking and his lungs trying to remember how to breathe. The test rig was still standing. Tilted, yes. Smoking, yes. But standing. Crane ran forward with his stopwatch and notepad like he hadn't just watched Dutch nearly die. 5 rounds in 48 seconds, all systems nominal until round 5. What broke? Dutch stood up slowly, checked himself for injuries. Nothing. Lucky. He walked back to the rig and crawled underneath, found the problem immediately. Mounting bolt, he said. Lower left position, sheared clean through, stress fracture from repeated shock loading. Can we fix it? Can we fix a fundamental design flaw in 12 days? Sure. If we're okay with killing crews. Dutch, don't. Dutch crawled out from under the rig, stood face to face with Crane. Don't tell me we'll make it work. Don't tell me we'll fix it in time. That bolt was rated for 15 tons of shear stress. It failed at 13. You know what that means. It means we need stronger bolts. It means our calculations were wrong. It means we're operating beyond safe parameters. It means if we field this weapon, we're gambling with American lives based on guesses and prayers. Crane didn't flinch. We're gambling anyway. Every Sherman we send to Sicily is a gamble. Every tank crew that climbs in knowing they can't penetrate a Tiger. We're already risking lives, Dutch. I'm just trying to give them better odds. By building something we know is flawed. By building something that's good enough to win. Perfect's the enemy of done. Remember, you taught me that. Dutch looked at the test rig, at the smoke still rising from overheated components, at the sheared bolt that had nearly killed him. He thought about Belleau Wood, about the French tank that had failed because desperate men had rushed engineering, about the screaming that had lasted 30 seconds but haunted him for 25 years. Then he thought about the photographs in Crane's office, the burning Shermans, the silhouettes in the flames, the boys who were dying right now because American armor wasn't good enough. Double the bolts, Dutch said finally. Every mounting point, redundant systems for every critical component. If one fails, the others take the load and we test again tomorrow. Full 10-round burst. If it fails, we redesign from scratch. We don't have time to redesign from scratch. Then it better not fail. Crane smiled, actually smiled. You're starting to sound like me. God help us both. Dutch walked away toward the workshop, toward the bolt specifications that needed recalculating, toward the mounting brackets that needed reinforcing, toward another sleepless night of making something impossible barely possible. Behind him, workers were already swarming the test rig, already removing the broken bolt, already welding reinforcement plates. The arsenal didn't stop, couldn't stop. The deadline was coming whether they were ready or not. 13 days to build a miracle or a disaster. February 22nd, 1943. 14 days into the deadline. The armor plates arrived from the rolling mill at dawn. 3-inch hardened steel, cut into sections that would form the casemate, the fixed fighting compartment that would replace the M10's open-top turret. Cash Wojcik stood in the welding bay and looked at the pieces laid out on the concrete floor. 12 separate plates, each one weighing 400 pounds, each one needing to be welded into a structure that would protect 5 men from 88mm German guns while housing a 90mm cannon that wanted to tear itself free from its mounting. No pressure. His welding crew stood behind him, 3 women and 2 old men. Betty was 22, husband fighting in the Pacific. Dorothy was 34, 2 kids at home with her mother. Helen was 29, fiancé killed at Guadalcanal. The old men were Frank and Samuel, 68 and 71 respectively, too old for combat, too experienced to waste, too stubborn to quit. All right, Cash said. This is it. This is what we've been preparing for. These plates need to form a watertight, airtight, shell-proof box. Every weld needs to be perfect. Every joint needs to hold, because if we fail, the crew inside dies. Everyone understand? Heads nodded. Betty picked up her welding helmet. How long do we have? Crane wants the casemate assembled by tomorrow night. That's 36 hours for 12 plates. 400-pound plates that need to be positioned, aligned, tacked, and fully welded. That's insane, Samuel said. His voice was rough from decades of cigarettes and factory air. Proper welding procedure requires cooling time between passes, stress relief heat treatment, ultrasonic inspection for hidden defects. We're talking about weeks of work, not days. Weeks gets 8,000 Americans killed at Sicily. Days gives them a chance. Days gives us garbage welds that fail under combat stress. Cash walked to Samuel, stood close. The old man was 6 inches taller, but Cash had the intensity that came from remembering telegrams and folded flags and brothers who never came home. My brother died on the Arizona because the armor wasn't thick enough. The welds were fine. The steel was fine, but it wasn't enough. Now we have a chance to build something that is enough. So yeah, we're going to cut corners, we're going to skip steps, we're going to violate every procedure in the manual, and if we're lucky, we'll save thousands of lives. If we're unlucky, we'll kill 5. I can live with those odds. Can you? Samuel looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his welding helmet. Where do we start? Bottom plate. We build from the foundation up. Frank Samuel, you're on positioning. Betty Dorothy Helen, you're on tack welds. I'll handle the final passes. Questions? No one answered. They just put on their helmets and picked up their tools and walked toward the steel plates that would either become salvation or disaster. Cash watched them work, watched the women struggle with 400-pound plates using overhead cranes and prayer. Watched the old men check alignment with levels and measuring tapes and eyes that had been reading dimensions since before Cash was born. This was American industry. Not perfect, not pretty, but determined, relentless. Built on the backs of people who understood that freedom wasn't free and wars weren't won by quitting when things got hard. He pulled down his own welding helmet, struck an arc, watched the electrode melt into the joint between 2 plates. Watched the molten metal flow and cool and bond. Watched steel become structure. Watched impossible become merely improbable. 36 hours to build a box that would save lives. Cash had built harder things with less time and worse materials. He'd build this one too. February 24th, 1943, 16 days into the deadline. Thaddeus Crane stood in front of the partially assembled vehicle and tried to remember why he'd thought this was possible. The M10 hull sat on blocks in the assembly bay. The original turret had been removed. In its place, the casemate was taking shape. Cash's crew had worked 72 hours straight. The bottom and side plates were welded. The front glacis was being positioned. The mounting for the 90mm gun was installed but not yet connected to the recoil system. It looked like something built in a shed by drunk amateurs, which was not the impression Crane wanted to convey to the Pentagon observers who were arriving tomorrow. Solomon appeared beside him with coffee. It'll look better when it's painted. It'll look like a death trap when it's painted. Probably because it is a death trap. But it's our death trap, and it's the best death trap we've got with 9 days left. Crane took the coffee, sipped, burned his tongue, didn't care. Washington's sending General Marshall tomorrow. He wants to see progress before we go to Aberdeen for testing. If he sees this, he'll cancel the whole program. Then we make sure he doesn't see this. We show him the test rig. We show him the calculations. We show him the armor plates and the gun mount and all the components that make it look like we know what we're doing. But not the actual vehicle. Not until it looks less like a salvage project and more like a weapons system. 9 days, Saul. We have 9 days to finish assembly conduct systems testing transport to Aberdeen and run live fire trials. If anything goes wrong, anything at all, we miss the deadline. Solomon drank his own coffee, looked at the half-built vehicle, at the welders still working despite exhaustion that made their hands shake. At the engineers checking measurements and rechecking calculations because one mistake would kill people. "You know what my uncle told me before I left Berlin?" Solomon said. "He said America was different. He said in Germany they plan everything perfectly and then fail anyway because reality doesn't care about plans. But in America they make terrible plans and somehow succeed anyway because Americans don't know when to quit." "Your uncle sounds like a smart man." "He was, right up until Treblinka. Now he's ash in a Polish field and I'm here building tank destroyers with recycled steel and stolen hydraulics and a deadline that makes no sense. You think he'd be proud or horrified?" Crane looked at Solomon. Really looked. Saw the exhaustion that went deeper than missed sleep. Saw the weight of family members who'd vanished into camps. Saw the desperation of a man who understood exactly what losing this war would mean. "He'd be proud," Crane said, "because you're doing what he couldn't. You're fighting back." Solomon finished his coffee, set the cup down on a workbench. "General Marshall arrives at 0900 tomorrow. I suggest you have some very impressive-looking paperwork to show him, because that vehicle won't be impressive-looking for at least another week." "We don't have another week." "I know, so we fake it. We show him what he wants to see and hide what he doesn't. We've gotten this far on desperation and lies. Might as well commit to the bit." Solomon walked away toward his office, toward the telephone that would connect him to Washington, toward the reports that made impossible sound merely difficult. Crane turned back to the vehicle, to the casemate that looked like a box made by children, to the gun that wanted to tear itself free, to the deadline that was coming whether they were ready or not. 9 days. He'd built careers on less time with worse materials. He'd build this miracle too, or die trying. February 25th, 1943, 17 days into the deadline. General George Marshall arrived at 0900 exactly. Not a minute early, not a minute late. The kind of punctuality that made you understand why he ran the entire United States Army. He was shorter than Crane expected, 62 years old but looked older. The kind of tired that came from fighting a war on two fronts with insufficient resources and too many casualties. He wore his uniform like armor. Every button perfect, every crease exact. A man who believed in discipline and order and the kind of systematic planning that Crane's project was violating at every turn. Solomon met him at the factory entrance with the kind of formal courtesy that made Crane realize the factory director knew how to play politics better than anyone had given him credit for. "General Marshall, welcome to Detroit Tank Arsenal. We're honored to have you." Marshall didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Where's the vehicle?" "The prototype is currently in final assembly, but we have comprehensive documentation and testing data to show you. If you'll follow me to the design hall." "I didn't drive from Washington to look at paperwork. Show me the vehicle." Solomon glanced at Crane, a look that said this was about to go very badly. Crane took a breath and stepped forward. "General, the vehicle is not currently in a presentable state. Assembly is ongoing and, Mr. Crane, I've been fighting wars since before you were born. I know what half-finished equipment looks like. Show me the vehicle or I'm canceling this program and sending you to Tunisia as an infantry private." It was not an idle threat. Crane led Marshall to the assembly bay, to the M10 hull with its welded casemate that looked like a metal box attached by hope, to the 90mm gun that wasn't yet mounted, to the interior that was still exposed wiring and unpainted steel. Marshall stood silent for 30 seconds. Then he walked around the vehicle, climbed onto the hull, looked inside the casemate, examined the gun mount, checked the armor thickness with a measuring tape he pulled from his pocket. Finally, he climbed down and turned to Crane. "This is what you're building with 25 days and Army resources." "Yes, sir." "It looks like scrap metal welded by blind men." "Yes, sir." "And you think this will kill tigers?" "I know it will, sir." "How?" "Because it has to." Marshall stared at him, Then unexpectedly he laughed, a short bark of sound that didn't contain much humor but held something like respect. I've seen a lot of desperate solutions in this war, Crane. A lot of engineers promising miracles with insufficient time and impossible requirements. Most of them fail. Most of them get people killed. What makes you different? Crane thought about the photographs, the burning Shermans, the silhouettes in the flames, the 8,000 projected casualties if they failed. I'm not different, sir. I'm just desperate enough to try anyway. Marshall nodded slowly. How many days until Aberdeen testing? 8 days, sir. March 3rd. We'll transport the completed vehicle for live fire trials. And if it fails, then I'll request transfer to Tunisia. Infantry private, like you said. I don't make idle threats, Crane. Neither do I, sir. Marshall looked at the vehicle one more time, at the crude welds, the exposed components, the weapon system that looked nothing like the polished products the Army usually fielded. 8 days, he said. Don't disappoint me. He left without another word. Just climbed into his staff car and drove away. Left Crane and Solomon standing in the assembly bay with the vehicle that looked like failure but just might become victory. Well, Solomon said, that went better than expected. He threatened to send me to combat as a private. Like I said, better than expected. He could have canceled the program. Crane looked at the vehicle. 8 days to turn scrap metal into salvation. 8 days to prove that desperate men could build miracles when given no other choice. He'd faced worse odds. Probably. Maybe. He hoped. February 28, 1943. 20 days into the deadline. The vehicle was complete at 3 in the morning. Not painted, not pretty, but complete. Dutch Vandermeer stood back and looked at what they'd built. The M10 hull sat lower than standard because of the weight, 4-inch armor plate on the front glacis instead of the Regulation 3. The casemate rose from the hull like a steel fortress, angular, brutal, designed not for elegance but for one purpose, keeping 5 men alive while they killed tigers. The 90mm gun protruded from the front like an accusation. 8 feet of barrel, hydraulic buffers visible through maintenance hatches, mounting brackets reinforced with enough steel to build a small car. It didn't look like any tank destroyer in the Army manual. It looked like something built in a factory by desperate men who'd run out of time and options and decided to build it anyway. Cash Wojcik climbed down from the casemate where he'd been installing the full ventilation panel. His hands were wrapped in bandages from burns sustained during the marathon welding sessions. His eyes were bloodshot. He moved like a man 20 years older than 34. Interior welds are complete, Cash said. Hydraulic lines are connected. Electrical systems are functional. Ammunition racks are installed. It's done. It's never done, Dutch said. It's just out of time. Same thing in a war. Dutch walked around the vehicle one more time, checking, always checking, looking for the flaw that would kill someone, the mistake that would turn this from salvation into disaster. He'd found 17 problems during assembly, 17 things that violated specifications or exceeded safety margins or just plain didn't work the way the calculations said they should. They'd fixed 12. The other 5 they'd decided to live with because there was no time left for perfect, only time for good enough. Dutch hated good enough. 25 years building tanks had taught him that good enough got people killed. But perfect took time they didn't have, so good enough would have to do. We need to name it, Cash said. Name what? The vehicle. Every weapon system has a designation. What's this one called? Dutch thought about it. Thought about the 20 days of hell that had gone into building this thing. The sleepless nights, the violated regulations, the corners cut and risks taken. Old grudge, he said finally. What? That's what we're settling. Old grudges, against the Germans for killing our boys, against the Tigers for making our armor obsolete, against time for never being enough. Old grudge. Cash smiled. Actually smiled. First time Dutch had seen that in 3 weeks. Old grudge it is. They stood in silence and looked at the vehicle. At Old Grudge. At the weapon that would either validate 20 days of desperate engineering or prove that you couldn't cheat physics no matter how hard you tried. Behind them, Thaddeus Crane entered the assembly bay. He stopped when he saw the vehicle, stood frozen for 10 seconds. Then he walked forward slowly, ran his hand along the armor plate. The welds, the gun barrel, his hand was shaking. "We did it," he said quietly. "We actually did it." "Did what?" Dutch asked. "Built something that works, because those aren't the same thing. We'll find out tomorrow. Aberdeen Proving Ground, 6 a.m. Be ready to load it on the transport. Thad, we haven't conducted any systems testing. Haven't fired the gun from the actual vehicle. Haven't verified that the hydraulics work under combat conditions. We're going to Aberdeen to test a weapon we've never tested ourselves." "I know. And if it fails, if the gun tears loose or the armor cracks or any of the 17 things that could go wrong do go wrong, we'll have killed the crew in front of Pentagon observers." Crane turned to face him. Dutch saw exhaustion that matched his own, saw desperation that went beyond tired, saw something that might have been fear or might have been certainty. With Crane, it was hard to tell the difference. "Then we'll have failed," Crane said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I killed 5 men because I was too arrogant to admit something was impossible. But if we don't try, if we tell Eisenhower we need more time, 8,000 men die at Sicily. So yeah, we're going to Aberdeen. We're going to test this weapon, and we're going to pray it works, because prayer's all we've got left." Dutch wanted to argue, wanted to say there had to be another way, but he looked at Old Grudge and knew there wasn't. They'd built this thing in 20 days with scrap steel and stolen parts and regulations violated at every turn. Now they'd find out if desperate engineering was genius or suicide. 6 a.m., Dutch agreed. "We'll be ready." Crane left. Cash left. Dutch stood alone in the assembly bay with Old Grudge. He walked to the vehicle one more time, put both hands on the cold armor, felt the welds that Cash had made, the steel that had failed once and been given a second chance. "Don't kill anyone," he said quietly. "Please, just this once. Work the way you're supposed to. Keep the boys alive." The vehicle didn't answer. Metal never did. But Dutch had been talking to metal for 25 years. Sometimes it listened. He hoped this was one of those times. March 3rd, 1943. 24 days into the deadline. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The transport truck arrived at 5:30 in the morning. Old Grudge sat on the flatbed like a threat, unpainted. The welds still showing grinder marks, the armor plates not quite flush at the joints. It looked exactly like what it was. Something built too fast by people who'd run out of time. The proving ground was empty except for the test crew and the observers. General Dwight Eisenhower stood 50 yards from the firing line. Next to him, General George Marshall. Behind them, 18 Army Ordnance officers, 2 photographers from Life magazine, a stenographer to record every detail for the after-action report. The test crew was ready. Clayton Brennan as driver, 45 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from frostbite at Kasserine Pass. He'd volunteered because he wanted revenge on the Tigers that had destroyed his unit. Harlan Shaw as gunner, 40 years old. Walked with a permanent limp from Guadalcanal. Said he'd spent 6 months in a hospital bed thinking about how to kill Germans, and this was his chance. Wendell Finch as loader, 28 years old. MIT engineer who'd insisted on being present because he'd calculated every number that went into this vehicle and wanted to see if his mathematics would kill people or save them. And Thaddeus Crane as commander. Because you didn't send men into danger you weren't willing to face yourself. Dutch stood outside the vehicle with Solomon, both of them silent, both of them knowing that the next hour would determine if 24 days had been enough. Eisenhower walked over. Up close, he looked tired. The kind of tired that came from planning an invasion of Sicily with insufficient intelligence and too many variables, the kind of tired that made desperate gambles look like reasonable options. "Mr. Crane, this is the vehicle you built in 24 days. "Yes, sir." "It looks like scrap metal." "It is scrap metal, sir. Recycled Sherman armor, melted down and re-rolled. We couldn't get virgin steel fast enough. And you think this will kill tigers? I know it will, or I'm about to die finding out." Eisenhower studied him for a moment. Then he smiled, a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes but held something like approval. "I've sent a lot of men to die in this war, Crane. Most of them don't get a choice about it. The fact that you're choosing says something, I'm not sure what, but something." He walked back to the observation area, left Crane standing beside Old Grudge with his hand on the cold armor and his mind running through 17 things that could go catastrophically wrong. Crane climbed into the commander's position. The casemate interior was cramped, 5 men in a space designed for 4. The 90mm gun breech dominated the center. Hydraulic lines ran along the walls. Ammunition racks were welded to the sides. It smelled like fresh paint and welding flux and fear. Clay took his position in the driver's seat, Harlan at the gunner's station, Wendell at the loader's position with his hands already shaking. The kid was terrified, they all were. "First target is 100 meters, Crane said over the intercom. "Panzer IV frontal armor plate, 80 millimeters, standard German medium tank. Harlan, this is your shot. Take your time, make it count." "Yes, sir." Clay started the engine. The M10's power plant roared to life. 500 horsepower. The whole vehicle shook. Through the narrow vision port, Crane could see the target. A steel plate mounted on a wooden frame. The kind of armor that protected thousands of German tanks across North Africa and Russia. "Wendell, load armor piercing." "Loading." The kid's voice cracked slightly. He wrestled a 90mm round from the rack, 45 pounds of steel and explosives, shoved it into the breech, locked it, loaded. "Harlan, fire when ready." "Ready." A pause. 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. "Firing." The world inside the casemate turned into violence. The 90mm fired and the entire vehicle rocked backward. The hydraulic buffers screamed. The sound was so loud that Crane's hearing protection might as well have been paper. The muzzle flash lit up the interior like a camera bulb. Smoke filled the compartment. The smell of burnt propellant made his eyes water. But the vehicle was still intact. The gun was still attached. Nobody was dead. Clay coughed. "Jesus Christ!" "Status check," Crane said. His own voice sounded distant, muffled. His ears were ringing despite the protection. "Everyone alive." "Alive," Harlan confirmed. "Target hit. Clean penetration." Crane looked through the vision port. The steel plate had a hole punched through it, 14 inches wide. The edges peeled back like flower petals. At 100 meters, the 90mm had gone through German armor with energy to spare. "Second target," Crane said. 300 meters. Tiger Eye frontal armor, 100 millimeters at 30-degree angle. Wendell, reload. The kid moved automatically, ejected the spent casing, loaded another round. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Fear had given way to training, to muscle memory, to the knowledge that they'd survived the first shot and maybe they'd survive the second. Clay maneuvered the vehicle. No turret meant turning the entire hull to aim. It took 40 seconds. Longer than Crane wanted, but acceptable for a test firing. "Harlan, fire when ready." This time Crane knew what was coming, knew the violence and the noise and the way the vehicle would rock, but knowing didn't make it easier. The 90mm fired and the world inside the casemate became chaos again. Smoke, sound, violence, the hydraulic buffers screaming like wounded animals. Metal stress, the smell of overheated components. But again the vehicle held. The gun remained attached. The mounting brackets didn't fail. Crane looked through the vision port. The Tiger Y armor plate was 300 meters away. Hard to see clearly through the smoke. But there was a hole, smaller than the first target, maybe 8 inches, but penetration was penetration. The 90mm had defeated armor that was supposed to be invincible. Outside he could hear shouting, excited voices, Pentagon observers who'd expected failure and were seeing success. Eisenhower would be smiling. Marshall would be calculating production numbers. The photographers would be documenting the moment when American engineering answered German steel. But Crane wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the third target, the one that hadn't been on the schedule, the one Eisenhower had added at the last minute because he wanted to test not just what Old Grudge could do now, but what it might face in the future. Third target, Crane said. 500 meters, Tiger II frontal armor, 150 millimeters. This is beyond test parameters. The gun might fail, the mounting might tear free. If anyone wants out, now's the time. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They'd come this far. They'd survived 24 days of impossible deadlines and violated regulations. They weren't quitting now. Wendell, load tungsten penetrator. Harlan, you'll need to compensate for distance. Wind is northwest at 12 miles per hour. Temperature 18 degrees. Clay, get us into position. The vehicle turned. 43 seconds this time. Clay was getting better, learning the feel of the hull, the way it handled with 4-inch armor on the front. The target was barely visible at 500 meters, a dark rectangle against the gray Maryland sky. The armor was thick enough to stop anything the Allies currently fielded, thick enough that intelligence said it was impenetrable, that Tigers II would be invincible when they entered service. Crane looked at the armor specifications one more time. 150 millimeters, 6 inches of hardened steel, the kind of protection that made German engineers arrogant, made them believe they'd won the armor race. Harlan, fire when ready. Sir, bore temperature is already high from 2 previous shots. Firing a third round risks barrel failure. We could fire when ready, Harlan. A pause, then firing. The 90mm fired for the third time, and the world inside the casemate went beyond chaos into something approaching apocalypse. The recoil was worse, the hydraulic buffers screaming higher, something metal tearing somewhere, a sound like fabric ripping but made of steel. The vehicle tilted. 5 degrees, maybe more. Something had failed, something structural. Crane braced against the commander's station and waited for the gun to tear free, for the mounting to fail, for Old Grudge to become the death trap Dutch had warned about. But the gun held, the mounting held, the vehicle held. Slowly the hydraulics returned to battery. The gun settled back into firing position. The vehicle stopped tilting. "Status," Crane said. His voice was hoarse. His hands were shaking. "Everyone report. Driver alive, gunner alive, loader alive and moderately terrified." Crane looked through the vision port. 500 meters away, the Tiger II armor plate was still standing. For a moment he thought they'd missed, thought the shot had gone wide, thought 24 days had ended in failure at the last possible second. Then he saw the hole, 16 inches wide. The armor plate cracked in a spiderweb pattern radiating from the impact point. 40% of the plate structurally compromised. Any crew behind that armor would be dead from spalling alone. Metal fragments ricocheting through the interior, turning the tank into a death trap. Old Grudge had penetrated armor that wasn't supposed to be penetrable, had killed tanks that weren't supposed to be killable, had proven that desperate men building desperate weapons in desperate times could still win. Crane climbed out of the commander's hatch. His legs were shaking. His hands were trembling. His ears were still ringing, but he was alive. They were all alive, and Old Grudge was intact. Eisenhower was already walking toward the vehicle, Marshall beside him, both of them moving fast, both of them looking at Old Grudge like they were seeing the future. Eisenhower reached the vehicle first, looked up at Crane. "Mr. Crane, you've just obsoleted every German tank in existence." Crane climbed down, stood on solid ground that felt like it was still moving. "Sir, the vehicle performed within acceptable parameters. Penetration was achieved on all 3 targets. The weapon system is combat ready." "Acceptable parameters," Marshall said. He was looking at something underneath the vehicle. "Crane, get down here." Crane crawled under Old Grudge, saw what Marshall was looking at, a mounting bolt, lower left position, sheared clean through, the same failure Dutch had predicted, the same structural problem that should have torn the gun free and killed everyone inside. Except it hadn't. Because Dutch had doubled the bolts, because redundant systems had taken the load when the primary failed, because desperate engineering had included just enough safety margin to keep them alive. "That bolt failed during the 3rd shot," Marshall said. "1 bolt, 1 failure. What happens when 2 fail or 3? "Then the crew dies," Crane said. "But they die fighting tigers instead of running from them. They die with a chance instead of with certainty." Marshall looked at him, really looked, seeing past the exhaustion, past the desperate gamble, past everything except the simple truth that wars weren't won by perfect weapons. They were won by good enough weapons fielded fast enough to matter. "Production order," Marshall said. 100 units by April 1st. Can you do it?" Crane thought about 24 days of hell, thought about what it would take to scale up, to turn one desperate prototype into 100 combat-ready vehicles. Thought about the corners they'd cut and the risks they'd taken and the fact that every vehicle they built would have that same sheared bolt waiting to fail. "Yes, sir." "Good, because Sicily launches in 4 months and I need every one of these tank destroyers on that island." Marshall walked toward his staff car, then he stopped, turned back. "Crane, 24 days. Remember that number. That's how long it takes Americans to build miracles when we stop asking if we can and start asking how fast." He left. Eisenhower stayed. "You gambled a lot on this," Eisenhower said quietly. "Your career, your reputation, 5 men's lives. What if it had failed? Then I'd have requested transfer to Tunisia, infantry, like General Marshall suggested. I'm serious. So am I, sir. We're already gambling with American lives. Every day, every battle, every decision about what equipment to field and what tactics to use. I'm just trying to change the odds. Give our boys something that lets them fight back instead of just dying." Eisenhower nodded slowly. "I'm sending 80,000 men to Sicily. Most of them won't come home. The ones who do will be changed, broken in ways that don't show. That's the math of war, Crane. You send men to die and you hope it means something. Hope they buy victory with their blood. Your vehicle might save some of them, might tip the odds just enough. That's worth 24 days. That's worth cut corners and violated regulations and gambling on sheared bolts." He walked away, left Crane standing beside Old Grudge with his crew climbing out, with Dutch running over to check the vehicle, with Solomon pulling up in a car to assess what came next. 24 days, 600 hours, 36,000 minutes. They'd built something that shouldn't exist, that violated every principle of proper engineering, that worked anyway because desperate men had made it work through sheer refusal to quit. Cash climbed out of the vehicle last, looked at the Tiger II plate 500 meters away. The hole punched through armor that was supposed to be invincible. "We did it," he said quietly. "Eddie, we did it." Crane didn't ask who Eddie was. He knew. Everyone who worked that hard carried someone with them. Some name, some face, some reason why quitting wasn't an option. "Production starts tomorrow," Crane said. "100 units by April 1st, 28 days. We've got the prototype, we've got the specifications, we've got workers who know how to build it. We do this 28 more times. 28 times the stress, 28 times the risk, 28 chances for sheared bolts and cracked armor and crews dying because we cut corners." "Yes." Cash looked at Old Grudge, at the vehicle they'd built in 24 days, at the weapon that had worked despite everything. "Then we better make sure those 28 are perfect, because Eddie deserves better than good enough." He walked away toward the transport truck, toward Detroit, toward the arsenal that would turn one miracle into 100. Dutch approached, looked at Crane, looked at Old Grudge. "That bolt failure should have killed you, but it didn't, because I doubled the bolts, because I built in redundancy despite the time pressure, because I knew you were going to do something stupid and I wanted you to survive it. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just promise me something. When we build the production models, when we scale this up, we keep the redundancy. We keep the safety margins. We don't cut those corners. Because I can live with a lot of things, Thad, but I can't live with knowing we killed crews because we were in a hurry." Crane looked at his hands. They were still shaking. 24 days of no sleep and too much coffee and the weight of knowing that mistakes would kill people. "I promise," he said. "Redundancy on every critical system, safety margins on everything that matters. We'll build these right." "Good, because you're going to build them 28 more times, and then those vehicles are going to war, and then we're going to find out if 24 days was genius or murder." Dutch walked toward his own car. "I'll see you in Detroit. Try to sleep before we start again." Crane watched him leave, watched everyone leave, until it was just him and Old Grudge in the proving ground that had witnessed the birth of something impossible. He walked to the Tiger II plate. 500 meters felt like 5 miles. When he reached it, he put his hand on the hole. 16 inches wide. Metal peeled back in layers, the kind of damage that left no survivors. 24 days ago, this armor was invincible. Now it was scrap metal with a hole in it, because desperate men had refused to accept invincibility, had built something better, had changed the odds just enough to matter. Crane pulled a piece of chalk from his pocket, wrote on the armor plate 3 words: "Built in 24 days." Then he walked back to Old Grudge, climbed into the commander's position one more time, sat in the cramped casemate that smelled like gunpowder and sweat, and something that might have been hope. They'd done it, against every reasonable expectation, against physics and time and regulations. They'd built a Tiger killer in 24 days, now they had to build 99 more in 28. Crane closed his eyes, felt the exhaustion that went deeper than bone, felt the weight of knowing what came next. Felt the fear that had been waiting in the background for 24 days finally catching up. But he also felt something else, something that had been missing since Kasserine Pass. Since the photographs of burning Shermans. Since the moment he'd realized his designs were killing the boys he was trying to protect. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd finally built something that would bring them home alive. July 10, 1943. 3 months after the last Crane left Detroit, Gela Beachhead, Sicily, 2:00 a.m. The Mediterranean was black as oil. No moon, cloud cover thick enough to hide the invasion fleet until the last possible moment. 80,000 American and British troops approaching the southern coast of Sicily, the largest amphibious operation in history. The first step toward liberating Europe. Lieutenant Beauregard Thorne stood in the commander's hatch of his M10A1E2 and watched the landing craft hit the beaches. He was 29 years old, West Point class of 1938, Alabama accent thick as molasses. He'd survived Kasserine Pass with 1 Sherman out of 12 in his company. watched 11 crews burn while he ran because his tank had thrown a track and couldn't move. He'd volunteered for Sicily because he wanted to see if Crane's tank destroyer could do what the Shermans couldn't. Could face tigers and win. Could bring crews home alive. His crew was ready. Clay Brennan in the driver's seat, the same Clay who'd driven Old Grudge at Aberdeen. Missing 2 fingers, but the best driver Bo had ever seen. Harlan Shaw on the gun, the Guadalcanal veteran with the limp and the steady hands and the voice that never shook no matter how bad things got. Jackson Lee as loader, 22 years old, Detroit arsenal worker who'd welded casemate number 43 and wanted to see his work in combat. 16 cranes had landed with the 2nd Armored Division. 16 vehicles that looked like scrap metal but carried 90mm guns that could kill anything Germany fielded. They were about to find out if 24 days had been enough. July 11th, 1943. 6:47 a.m. The German counterattack came from the northwest, 4 Tigeres, 6 Panzer IVs, supporting infantry in half-tracks. The kind of armored thrust that had torn through American positions at Kasserine. The kind that made Sherman crews abandon their tanks and run because staying meant burning. Bo watched through his periscope as 9 Shermans from the 66th Armored Regiment engaged at 800 meters. Too far. The 75mm guns couldn't penetrate Tiger armor at that range. But the Sherman crews fired anyway because regulations said to engage enemy armor on contact. The Tigers fired back. 3 Shermans exploded in 90 seconds. Direct hits. Turrets blown off. Crews that didn't have time to bail out. The other 6 Shermans were retreating, falling back, running like Bo had run at Kasserine. His radio crackled. Panicked voices. "Tigers, fall back, fall back." Bo keyed his mic, spoke to the other crane commander 200 yards to his right. "Lieutenant Kowalski, you seeing this?" "I see it, Bo. Orders, hold position. Wait for 400 meters, let the Shermans clear out. Then we show these bastards what Detroit built." Clay's voice from the driver's compartment. "Bo, we staying?" "We're staying, Clay. Get us hull down behind that ridge. I want the glacis angled 30 degrees. Make the armor work." The crane moved. Slow. Heavy. Nothing like a Sherman, but it didn't need to be fast. It just needed to be in position when the Tigers came. 6:54 a.m. The Tigers advanced. Confident. No return fire from the retreating Shermans. The German commanders probably thought they'd broken another American armored unit. Probably thought this would be another Kasserine. Another massacre. They were 450 meters away when Bo gave the order. "Harlan, target left Tiger. Glacis plate. Fire when ready." "Roger." Harlan's voice was calm. Southern drawl. Like he was ordering breakfast instead of preparing to kill a 54-ton tank. "I see him." 3 seconds. The world held its breath. Firing! The 90mm fired and the inside of the crane became violence. Recoil, noise, hydraulic buffers screaming. Smoke. The smell of burnt propellant. Everything Dutch and Crane and Cash had built being tested in the only place that mattered. Combat. Through the vision port, Bo saw the result. The Tiger stopped. Just stopped. Like someone had cut the power. Smoke poured from the engine deck. The turret hatch popped open. German crew bailing out. Running. The Tiger's glacis plate had a hole punched clean through it. First American kill of a Tiger Y in combat. Bo felt something break loose in his chest. Something that had been tight since Kasserine. Since watching his crews burn. Since running when he should have stayed and fought. "Target destroyed," Harlan said, still calm. "Second Tiger advancing. Range 400 meters. Jackson, reload." "Reloading." The kid moved fast, ejected the spent casing, loaded another 90mm round. 47 seconds. Too slow for training. Fast enough for combat. The second Tiger fired. An 88mm shell hit the crane's glacis plate. The impact sounded like a church bell struck by a sledgehammer. The whole vehicle rang. Bo felt the shock through his boots, through his hands on the commander's station. But the armor held, 4-inch recycled steel from failed Shermans. Melted down, re-rolled, angled properly, it held. "We're hit," Clay said, "but we're alive." "Then let's make sure they're not," Bo said. "Harlan target, second Tiger, fire." The 90mm spoke again, 90 seconds after the first shot. The second Tiger took the round in the side as it tried to maneuver the thinner armor, the vulnerable point. Harlan had waited for it, picked his shot. The Tiger exploded, not just penetrated, exploded, ammunition cooking off, turret lifting from the hull, the kind of catastrophic kill that left no survivors. 7:04 a.m. The remaining 2 Tigers retreated, actually retreated, fell back behind the Panzer IVs, German armor running from American guns for the first time in the war. Lieutenant Kowalski's crane engaged the Panzer IVs. 4 destroyed in 6 minutes. 2 retreated with the Tigers. The battle ended at 7:11 a.m. 19 minutes of combat. 2 cranes, 0 losses, 6 German tanks destroyed, 2 Tigers and 4 Panzers running. Bo climbed out of the commander's hatch, stood on the hull of his crane, looked at the battlefield, at the burning Tigers, at the German crews who'd abandoned their invincible armor because American engineering had made it obsolete. Clay emerged from the driver's hatch, looked at the dent in the glasses where the 88 had hit. Ran his hand over it. The armor had held, not even cracked, just dented. "Eddie would have liked this," he said quietly. Bo didn't ask who Eddie was. Everyone carried someone, some name, some reason to fight. Harlan climbed out. Harlan climbed, lit a cigarette, hands steady. "Bo, how many Tigers you think we killed today?" 2 confirmed, 2 retreated, call it 2 and 2 assists. "Good start." Harlan exhaled smoke. "How many more we got to kill before Sicily's done? However many Germany sends. Then let's get back to it." They climbed back into the crane, back to the cramped casemate that smelled like gunpowder and sweat and victory. Back to the war that would determine if 24 days had saved thousands or just delayed the inevitable. But for now, for this moment, they'd proven something. Proven that American workers building desperate weapons in impossible time could still beat German engineering, could still win. The crane's engine roared. They moved forward, toward the next fight, toward whatever came next. Behind them, 2 Tigers burned in the Sicilian sun. July 18, 1943, Detroit. 1 week after Gela, the telegram arrived at Thaddeus Crane's office at 3:00 p.m., Western Union. The kind of yellow envelope that meant someone was dead. Crane stared at it for 10 seconds before opening. War Department Casualty Report. Vehicle M10A1E2 serial number 47 engagement. July 16, 1943. Palermo Road, Sicily crew status 5. KIA killed in action crew. Manifest Sergeant Marcus Webb. 24 CPL James Dutton 22. PFC Luis Herrera 19, PFC Robert Kim 21, PFC Thomas Black 20. Cause casemate weld failure under direct 88mm impact. Pre-existing hairline crack in weld seam caused catastrophic structural failure. Spalling fragments killed all crew members instantly. Preliminary investigation weld defect traced to production. Arsenal quality control records indicate vehicle number 47 flagged for crack in casemate weld on April 14, 1943. Repair authorized by Chief Engineer T. Crane. Vehicle shipped April 15, 1943. Crane read it twice, then he set it down on his desk very carefully. Like it might explode if he moved too fast. 5 names: Marcus Webb, James Dutton, Luis Herrera, Robert Kim, Thomas Black. He walked to the window, looked out at the arsenal floor, at the production line that was still building cranes. 3 per day, every one of them with redundant systems, with safety margins, with doubled bolts and reinforced welds, every one except 47, the one he'd ordered patched. The one he'd shipped knowing the weld was questionable. The one he'd gambled would hold long enough. It hadn't. Solomon appeared in the doorway, saw the telegram, saw Crane's face, understood immediately. "Which one?" Solomon asked quietly. 47, the cracked weld. "How many, Sim? 5. Solomon walked to the desk, read the telegram, read the names. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Thaddeus. Without your 112 cranes, we'd have lost 4,200 men at Sicily. Eisenhower's staff calculated it. 4,200, you saved 4,195 lives." "Don't quote me statistics," Crane's voice was flat. Empty. "I know statistics. I built my career on statistics, but those 5 men don't care about 4,200. Their families don't care." "No. They don't, and you'll carry those 5 names for the rest of your life. That's the price of command. That's the price of war." "I don't accept that price." "You don't have to accept it. You just have to live with it." Crane turned back to the window, watched the workers below, building weapons, building hope, building the tools that would win the war or lose it. "I ordered that weld patched," he said. "April 14th, vehicle 47. Cash found a hairline crack. Regulations said scrap it. I said patch it and ship it, because we needed every vehicle. Because 8 days wasn't enough time to rebuild. Because I thought the odds were acceptable. They were acceptable. 4,195 to 5. Tell that to Marcus Webb's mother. Tell that to Luis Herrera's wife. Tell them their son, their husband died because I thought the odds were acceptable." Solomon didn't answer. There was no answer. Just the weight of knowing that command meant choosing who lived and who died. Meant carrying names. Meant living with decisions that saved thousands but killed 5. Crane picked up the telegram, folded it, put it in his desk drawer. Next to the photographs of burning Shermans. Next to the letter from Eisenhower thanking him for the cranes that had changed the battle at Sicily. 5 names. He'd carry them until the day he died. April 15th, 1943. 43 days after the deadline began, the production line at Detroit Tank Arsenal ran 24 hours a day, 112 vehicles completed, Old Grudge and 111 siblings. Each one built faster than the last, each one incorporating lessons learned, each one carrying redundant systems and safety margins and the desperate hope that they'd be enough. The vehicles had an official designation now. M10A1, E2, experimental 90mm variant, but everyone called them cranes. After the man who'd built the impossible in 24 days. Thaddeus Crane stood on the factory floor and watched the last vehicle roll off the line. Number 112. Painted olive drab, vision ports installed, hydraulic systems tested, electrical systems verified, ready for combat. Solomon appeared beside him. 112 vehicles in 6 weeks, that's 3 per day. Do you know what that means? It means we beat the deadline. It means we changed how America builds weapons. Sequential development is over. Concurrent engineering is the future. Your 24-day miracle just became doctrine. Crane thought about sheared bolts, about recycled steel, about corners cut and risks taken, about the 5 men who would die when vehicle number 47's cracked weld failed under combat stress. He didn't know about vehicle 47 yet. That telegram wouldn't arrive until July. But he'd know. He'd carry those 5 names for the rest of his life. It's not a miracle, Saul. It's a gamble, and gamblers always lose eventually. But not today. Today we built 112 tank destroyers that can kill tigers. Today we changed the odds at Sicily. Today we saved lives. Today, Crane agreed. But tomorrow, next week, when these vehicles go to war and we find out what we missed, what we got wrong, what corners we cut that shouldn't have been cut. Solomon was quiet for a moment. Then he put his hand on Crane's shoulder. then we'll live with it. Because that's what engineers do in wartime. We build the best we can with the time we have, and we hope it's enough, and we carry the weight when it isn't. The last crane rolled toward the loading dock, toward the transport that would take it to the port, toward the ship that would carry it to Sicily, toward the war that would determine if 24 days had been genius or disaster. Cash Wojcik stood by the loading dock, watched the vehicle go. He'd welded every casemate personally. 112 boxes designed to keep men alive. 112 chances to get it right. "This one's for you, Eddie," he said quietly. "We built something good, something that matters, something that'll bring the boys home." The vehicle disappeared into the transport, into the future, into the history books that would record whether Crane's gamble had paid off. 24 days to design and build a prototype, 28 days to build 99 more, 52 days total to change how America fought the war, the 25-day miracle, that's what they'd call it later. After Sicily, after the Cranes destroyed Tigers and Panthers and Panzer IVs, after the kill ratios shifted from 45-1 against to 6-0 in favor, after 8,000 projected casualties became 1,200 actual casualties, because American tank destroyers could finally fight back. But Crane wasn't thinking about miracles. He was thinking about Vehicle 47, about the cracked weld he'd ordered patched instead of replaced, about the 5 men whose names he didn't know yet but would carry forever. He walked to his office, sat at his desk, looked at the photographs of burning Shermans that had started everything 24 days ago. They'd built something better, something that worked, something that saved thousands. But perfection had required time they didn't have, so they'd built good enough instead, and good enough would have to do. Because in war, perfect was the enemy of done, and done was the only thing that mattered when boys were dying and the deadline was coming and time had finally run out.